I'm Rachel Gerth, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the inspiration for my honors thesis. So picture this. It's your sophomore year of high school, a Sunday in fact, and it's nothing terribly out of the ordinary. You have homework, you tutor math at 3, and it's your turn to cook family dinner. All of a sudden, things get a little bit less ordinary when it's 6 in the morning and your house is surrounded by police and EMT because your dad died. Regardless, I showed up to school Monday morning with all of my homework done, like a little puffy-eyed, I'll admit, but like everything was pretty normal. And this was my first real experience with death. This was the first time I saw like the life breathed out of someone. Even though by the time I was 15, I'd been to over a handful of funerals, my brothers, my grandfathers, my best friends, they all sort of felt the same. So if I'm being honest, it really sucked that my dad died. You know, I was only 15 and my sister only 10, but the whole ordeal was a bit of an inconvenience. You know, it's not an inconvenience that my dad died, you can't really help that, but sort of the bells and whistles that went along with it and the expectations of me. Apparently, it's showing up to school 24 hours after your parent dies isn't expected. In fact, even a year after that, a teacher whom I've never talked to came up to me and said, "So you're the girl who came to school the day after her dad died?" And I said, "I guess." And it's kind of a weird reputation to have. And so fast forward, and it's my senior year of high school, and I'm jotting down notes in my Calc 3 journal. And if you flipped through it, you'd learn about limits, derivatives, and over in the margins, you'd see a draft of what would become my living will. And that may come as a surprise, you know, why is this 17-year-old girl drafting a living will? But for me, it wasn't a surprise at all. It just felt natural. But none of my friends or my family could fathom, you know, why I'd care about something like dying at such a young age. And I couldn't understand why they didn't think about it or talk about it like I did. And you know, I didn't realize until a friend revealed to me how terrified she is of dying that this fear of death is something shared among a lot of them. And I mean, if you visualize dying like this, then it can seem a little scary. But if you visualize it like this, then I don't really understand where the fear is coming from. Lao Tzu, a famous Chinese philosopher, once said that there's no illusion greater than fear. Yet according to Wilhelm Steckel, every fear is the fear of death. Let that sink in for a second, because it took me quite aback at first. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. You know, is a fear of heights really a fear of the distance, or is it a fear of what can happen at the bottom? Likewise, is a fear of snakes the fear of the animal itself, or what it can do to you? So I started thinking, and if I'm disillusioned by this fear, and every one of my fears is rooted in this fear of death, then will it ever go away? You know, and why will it go away? After thinking about it, I realized that when talking, if you've even spent an hour talking with someone over the age of, let's say, 50, you might notice how casually they approach the subject of death. I discovered this myself through working in a retirement community from when I was in high school until now. And you know, you'd round the corner and hear constant gossip on who is in the hospital, and then jokes on who's the next to go. And these conversations looked a lot different than the conversations I was having with my friends about death, or the conversations I wasn't having, I should say. And so that started to get me thinking about how when we're born, we don't even know what death is. The concept of something being gone forever seems very foreign. When I was 3 and my brother died, I didn't really understand what happened, but I just understand that everyone around me was really sad. And then at some point, you start to understand it and you start to fear it like my friends did. And then jump all the way forward to you're elderly and you're sitting and joking about who's going to die over brunch. And so it was these really big transitions that I didn't understand, going from not knowing it to fearing it to accepting it. And I maybe still don't understand them, but I started to think of where those transitions happen. And so the obvious difference between me and the residents I worked with was our age. But age isn't necessarily, like our values changing as we age isn't necessarily a surprise to anyone. But there are so many other factors that can influence our perceptions, such as culture, religion, life experiences, environments, and so many more probably. I mean, for instance, if you take this very large graphic on that associates color with different emotions and life experiences in different regions of the world, you'll notice that number 59 is mourning. And you'll also notice that the West is the only region of the world that associates the color black with mourning. In fact, if you were in Japan, the color black is often worn at a wedding. So it's these small things, but honestly, like really big differences just in like one ideology that made me realize that not only is our age different, but our environments are different. So I'm surrounded by people of all different ages: my sister, my mom, the children I volunteer with, and the residents I work with. Whereas the people living in these retirement communities are, for the most part, exclusively surrounded by people of their own age, people who are more likely to die than in my environment. In addition, I describe my environment as what I term free form. There's no definitive structure, there's no consistency like in a retirement community. And in these communities, while they are independent, there's an overarching institution making a lot of the decisions for them. Decisions like what time they can eat, what they can eat, what activities are planned for them, and who they can associate with. It was starting to get me to wonder whether it's this structure of an institution has the ability to shape how residents perceive death. But how do you even begin to study something as subjective as what a person thinks on death? Not only are opinions going to vary drastically from person to person, but the topic itself can also be triggering. So this is where I was most surprised. As I interviewed residents, I realized that they talked about death with ease. I should have known, but I always thought, asking, so tell me in excruciating detail about how your husband died wouldn't go over well. But they talked about it, they didn't shed a tear. And in fact, some even went so far as to say that I'm praying that I'll die. And so, not because they were depressed or lonely, but because they were ready. However, when it came to the death of others, like their friends or their family members, even those around the same age of them, they were still very worried, still very emotional about their deaths. While I've yet to determine whether institution has an effect on how we perceive death, I have noticed some themes so far throughout the responses that I've gotten. The first being that they say that they're not afraid of death, that it's not a big deal. They understand that's just something that comes along with living. However, it doesn't seem like this understanding can be applied to others. And by this I mean that they're totally comfortable with their own death, but when they think about the death of others, they pray that they don't die. They know that death is natural for themselves, but they can't accept that death is natural for others. And so I'm wondering, is this just part of our human condition and of us worrying more for others than worrying for ourselves? The other big theme that I noticed was that they said that they're ready to die, that they've lived a good life. And I was thinking, okay, well, why now? Why can you say now that you've lived a good life? Are you implying that a long life is a good life? Because almost everyone I interviewed was over the age of 80. I even interviewed someone who is 101, and she said that, I'm ready, it's whatever. But why can we not acknowledge that our life is good right now, whether we're 7 years old or 20 years old or 80 years old? Most of you are probably familiar with this graphic, the before I die wall, where you write something you want to accomplish before you die. They've put them up on the Diag, they put them in famous cities around the world, and they get hundreds of different responses. And this was actually brought up during one of my interviews. A resident said, she said, if I lived my life with that ideology of doing things before I die, then I would never be ready to die because there'd always be something more that I want to do. She encouraged me instead to think about it like this. She said, think about what you have accomplished, what you're proud of, and the good that you've already put in the world. She said, yes, you can put more good in the world, but you've already done so much. And so she said that was how her husband thought every day, that, he's done with the day. If he dies, that's fine. He's already done what he was supposed to do up until then. And I really liked that she encouraged me to not think of things as before I die, I should accomplish all of this stuff, but rather that I've already put good into the world. Whether you're 7 and all you can do is just smile at people and hand them flowers that you've picked, or whether you're 20 and you're trying to write an honors thesis about how, perceptions on death affect you. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that my biggest takeaway is that if we go back to that first quote, that every fear is the fear of death, then the good news is that it seems to go away eventually. That fear goes away maybe by acknowledging that we've lived a good life. But what I think is more important is that we try to acknowledge that we're living a good life. And then if we can do that, then maybe we can dispel this fear of death. And then maybe we can live every single day and truly be happy and truly live courageously. Thank you.